The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
The More Show is in partnership with Ozark Mountain Publishing, taking readers beyond the unexplained. The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world on TV, radio and online. I bid you all good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be across all the world's time zones. This is The More Show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information that you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Sherry O'Brien. Now, Sherry is a psychotherapist, speaker and author who has assisted thousands of individuals within her workshops, groups and private practice to transform their pain into possibility. The inspiration behind her book, Peaks and Valleys, Integrative Approaches for Recovering from Loss, is her passion to provide a larger audience with these tools of transformation. Sherry O'Brien, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. It really is. You know, one thing with the show that I do is we do delve into the subject of death quite a bit, and one thing we haven't touched on is coping with loss, and your wonderful book deals with that with lots of exercises and some great material to sort of help us get through. You know, loss is something that we can be assured of in life, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, we have all types of losses. Death of a loved one, obviously one of the more severe and traumatic losses. But, you know, sometimes people don't think about retirement as a loss. They will plan for it financially, but a lot of times people will identify with their job, and when they retire from it, they've lost a sense of identity. So those are types of losses that often go unrecognized. Dreams and beliefs and meaning of life and those types of things often just go unrecognized as a form of loss. And if you accumulate enough of that and anything comes up that feels similar or resonates with it, it can incapacitate you after a while if you're not able to release those losses or the energy of the loss.
Now, you know, you've written this book from a perspective of, you know, experiencing quite a bit of loss in your life as well. And, you know, after, you know, to begin with, the book starts off with your 21-year-old nephew who died from cancer as well.
Yes, that's correct. It was one of the most challenging things. I had worked with cancer patients. I had done a bereavement group. I've been helping, technically thousands of people in my workshops and conferences and so forth. But when it happened to my own family, what I realized, there wasn't a whole lot of tools out there that someone could take with them and use to release the incapacitating energy that gets stuck as a result of the trauma of a loss. And I experienced that with the loss of my nephew and the loss of my brother. And I witnessed it with my family members going through it. So that's what really compelled me to look into using some of the techniques that I'd already used with my clients and was teaching in other modalities and for use with other types of issues.
Yeah.
And decided, you know, this might work with the type of loss that we had incurred, and it did help it helped us go through that.
Yeah. I mean, are you quite a spiritual person, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think anybody can do the type of work that I do and be an agnostic or an atheist to me.
Yeah.
Because I've had so much contact with the angelic forces, if you will. I'm very empathic, so what I do oftentimes is something that I would call kind of a mix of intuitive guidance, and that's how I was guided to do this book. I kept getting, requests from my clients, requests from conferences, and several people, and actually did an interview once for my one of the tools in my book is a CD that I put together years ago when my nephew was going through the cancer, called Release and Transform Burden, and I was doing an interview for it, and the person that was doing the interview, she is a psychic, and she kept referring to it as a book, and we laughed, and I said it was a CD, and she said, you're going to have a book, and I just kept listening and listening, and sure enough, this kind of, it formed itself. I was just the vehicle that put it together, so to speak.
Yes, of course. Now, I mean, in your book you mention all sorts of loss of a relationship, home, mobility, identity, beliefs and meanings. I mean, there's a whole list of them that we'll get into as well. But, I suppose it takes a long time, doesn't it, for some people to get through a loss in a sense, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and unfortunately, we are not, I guess most of our culture, especially with the death of a loved one, I mean, here in the States anyway, in the U.S., oftentimes there's 3 days that you get to be off work to, do the funeral, the memorial service, etc. And then there's an expectation that, life goes on, which of course it does, but that doesn't take away the traumatic grief, the sadness, sometimes the anger, all of the emotions that go under it. And for some people, there's an assumption that you are supposed to go through specific stages, and that's really based upon Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, and really that was set up for people that were dying, and they did go through a stage, and ultimately that their death was that completion of those stages. But people that are in bereavement or mourning the loss of a loved one, they will always miss that loved one, but they can get through the incapacitating grief, if you will, by doing some of the techniques that I've shared in the book. But also, the amount of time is going to be different for each person. And it's going to depend on the circumstances around the death and so many different things. But anytime we have an attachment to anything, a loved one, a job, anything, we're going to experience a loss when we no longer have that, if that bond is broken. It can't be avoided. No. And,
I mean, obviously you've experienced, I believe, suicide in your family as well. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. My brother, I mean, it was 6 months after my nephew died, my brother committed suicide, and there was a lot of shame based around that, because it's one of those things that people don't, it's one of those things that people get into a mixed feeling. There's shame about it, there's anger about it, there's so many, oftentimes, I should say, there's so many different entangled emotions, and there's really not a whole lot out there, although I'm glad to see that there are some support groups now for individuals who have had family members commit suicide. But there hasn't been a whole lot about the trauma that those individuals experience and how they can release it at a cellular level, which is really a huge part of recovery. and to keep from going through the flashbacks over and over again about the last thing that you said to them, or what your experience might have been, or how you might have changed it. There's a lot of trauma that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, and as suicide, people that who are the survivors of suicide, the family members, for example, I mean, I think you turn them in your book as the survivor, sort of, and the survivor guilt that they carry as well.
Absolutely. And that survivor guilt, it's really around so many different things. I mean, shame is one of them, and trying to get a sense of control, or trying to find meaning in what happened. There's so many different reasons. So it's unique to each individual, but often the individuals experience something very similar.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose, the guilt becomes, well, confusing and complicated, and, you have to deal with the trauma as well, don't you, of that?
Absolutely. And the only way that I have found effective in dealing with trauma really is energy psychology. It's one of the tools that energy psychology and hypnotherapy, it gets to the subconscious, which is where the trauma originated, if you will. There's a chemical cascade that goes on in the body, and it literally is frozen within the subconscious, reliving, and the body itself reliving memories over and over again, in an attempt to try to change the outcome, which we know we're not able to do, from a perspective of reality, but we can change the way that we reacted to the outcome.
Yeah.
And what I mean is that instead of freezing it, allowing it to flow through and process those emotions.
Yeah, and with processing those emotions, would that be, some people obviously crying and not judging themselves for crying in a sense, and just letting through whatever emotions come out. But is that right? Would you just say it's a sort of just to go with those emotions?
Yes, that's a form of release, and when we cry, as well as when we laugh, and it's amazing, the chemicals that are released from the brain when we cry and laugh, they're almost identical, but they are natural painkillers. And so when we cry, we do the releasing, we do the cleansing. Oftentimes, if that's all you're doing, then it can go into the dysfunctional mode. The energy psychology tools that I have in my book utilizes the tapping techniques, tapping on certain meridians to allow the blocks to be released in that way.
Yeah.
So as you go through processing the emotion, it's not as intense, and it's a quicker resolution, and such as, the imagery and hypnotherapy and so forth they're also useful. So I've combined and integrated several different types of modalities, and obviously with the book, I've put it in a way that people can use the various scripts in the back of the book and fill in the blank. Ideally, if you're working with a practitioner, we would fine-tune it and get into very specific incidents that may come up in memories and so forth, but you can't do that. When you're writing a book, you have to be more general in the script. So that's what I've done to help people continue to process. So they may be processing the loss of a loved one through death, or the loss of a loved one through a relationship that's ended, or various other types of losses.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into relationships very shortly as well. But with the loss of someone through death, for example, it's to me, when someone's passed on like that, it really shakes up people's foundation of what they believe in. You know, it really makes them go into thinking about conscious sort of subjects, and really getting a grip with what their faith is in a sense. You know, has that consciousness disappeared, or does it continue? I mean, there's some great teachings to be learnt from the death in a sense.
Yes, yeah. And oftentimes what I will do with those clients is we'll create rituals, which is also part of the book. I'll help them create rituals so that they can find meaning, if you will, and do something what's called relocating that sense of connection with their loved one, so that it's no longer like they're outside of themselves, but that they can find that connection within. And as you know, if you've ever lost a loved one, the memory doesn't go with them. You still have the memory. You still have the connection of what that person meant to you. And, oftentimes I will have people do like a memory book or a memory box, bringing types of, well, it can be anything from pictures, symbols, types of things that will help them remember, if you want.
Yes.
So that they don't, oftentimes that keeps people from recovering, because they feel like if they move forward, that somehow they're going to lose that connection and memory of their loved one. And if they can relocate that memory and realize that we can keep the memory alive, then they're more likely to move through that recovery process.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's always been my belief that when people that I've lost who have passed on, they wouldn't want you to keep grieving constantly for them. They'd want you to live your life as well.
Yes. Yes. And if we're open to it, I've had so many different stories. I shared the story of my nephew, but when I was writing the chapter, which was very difficult,
I can imagine,
about the death of my brother and my nephew, I was sitting out on my deck, and we have this deck it's almost like a tree house, because we're so far off the ground. So without going into any detail, this butterfly, it just landed right on the page, and so the butterfly became symbolic. And I had done a butterfly release prior to writing the book in a ritual that for my nephew and my brother. And when this butterfly landed on the paper, I mean, it became symbolic of my nephew. So whenever I'm, in this space and I have a butterfly come to me, it reminds me of the connection, that transition. The butterfly is a wonderful symbol, if you will, of how life goes on in a different form.
Yeah, yeah. And would you say for yourself that time is a great healer as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, most of the people in my bereavement group, they will run across people that would say, oh, it'll get better with time. And for them, they don't feel that it's helpful in some ways, because it's kind of a rote saying that people will say to try to help them feel better. But there is a knowing that with time, as long as you use the time in a way that processes and releases in the way that you need to, and doesn't keep you stuck in a specific cycle, then obviously time is going to go by, and you're more likely going to recover from that. Yeah. Sometimes saying, it'll get better with time, people don't find it helpful.
No.
But it does. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but everybody's time is different.
Yes, of course, of course. Well, we're just going to take a quick break on that, and we'll be right back after this.
The Moore Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.
The More Show is in partnership with Ozark Mountain Publishing, taking readers beyond the unexplained.
Welcome back to the show. I'm still joined by my guest, Sherry O'Brien. Now, Sherry, just before the ad break there, obviously we were just discussing loss and, you know, how time is a sort of coping mechanism for that, how over time it does get easier, even though those memories will never fade. But obviously, you know, when couples, you know, lose a child, for example, would you say the grief process for that is different?
Well, I think it's different based upon the relationship that we have with each person that we lose to death. So absolutely, because oftentimes when people lose a child, there's that parental expectation of, I should have been able to do something to protect them. You know, there's that implication that as a parent, you should be more in control than you really are. And so it often involves that. It also involves with that sense of how life should be. And we had it set up, and we all know that in reality it is often not the case. But we have it set up in our minds that life should be one way, and that way is that the parent dies before the child.
Yeah.
That you grow old and, you know, die of natural causes or something like that. And so we don't have a framework for expecting the death of a child before a parent, which I don't think we should. I mean, that's not something that we should focus on. And it's not something that's desirable, but it makes it more difficult for people to go through that process, people that have been, you know, in the place of losing a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the children as well, I mean, there is also the abortion side of things as well. I mean, would you say that's a sort of grief that's a lot that comes on after a longer term, as you know, as time has set in?
Yes, I've experienced that. Some of my clients have come to me, and there's a lot of guilt and shame about the abortion, and there's really no place for them to go and you know, process that loss. And oftentimes the reason for that is because it's not something that the larger society, some people accept it, some people don't, and so there's that secrecy, if you will. And so there's this, and there's no memorials, there's no rituals, there's no form of closure. I really don't like that word closure, but that's the best word that we have for recognizing that something has ended and something has changed, and we're going to move forward or we're not. So the abortion is one of those issues that's difficult for a lot of people to get through, and they have to let go of the grief around it. They have to get into the forgiveness place. There's so many other emotions entangled in it, so I can't be real specific because some people might experience, most people that have had an abortion experience a feeling of guilt and shame.
Yeah.
But there may be anger about it, especially to the father, for example, and the father may not feel like they had a choice in the matter. So there's so many different emotions involved in it.
Of course. And, you know, I love your book because at the end of every chapter as well, it's sort of divided into 3 parts, but should I say at the end of every part, there's also sort of journal activity which you can do by yourself, which sort of allows you to be well, gentle on yourself, but to express your emotions, because you know that's a key to part of the healing process as well.
Yes, absolutely. And you gather the information that you place in the journal, and then you can use it with the various tools that I have in part 3 of the book. And you can continue to go back and forth between using some of the information that you've gathered up and journaled about. You may want to use the energy psychology technique that I've shared, or you may want to use rituals, or you may want to use some of the guided imagery that I've shared in the book, some of the various tools, the energy work, and you may want to use each and every tool on specific things that you put together in your journal.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I want to get into some of the healing aspects of your work, but I'm just trying to, we'll move into that shortly as well, because there are just so many forms of loss. I mean, you know, I was thinking about today. I mean, it could be a loss of a home. You know, you're moving, but you know you're going to go somewhere better, but it's still the loss of the home. But obviously, let's get into relationships. Let's move that sort of into that, because you know we've all experienced an end of what could be a good relationship or a bad relationship or a divorce in a sense, haven't we?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, when you think about loss of relationships, even losses, I want to go back for just a moment, even losses that we consider desirable. So let's say, for example, I used to work in the addictions field, and so even those losses, people that have decided they're going to get clean and sober and go through recovery, oftentimes, you know, there's a loss associated with that, because that substance or alcohol or whatever it was that they were using, gambling, that was a coping skill that they relied on for years. And there's some grieving with that, even if it's a desirable loss. And then there's the associated friends and relationships and family members that you may have to release, or at least distance yourself from or detach from, because they may still be using, may still be in that environment that's not conducive to your recovery.
Right.
So I see loss occurring with people making, you know, wise choices, whether it's a move to a better environment. For whatever reason, there's going to be a loss associated with it, because there was an attachment of some form. So that's a huge piece of the relationship puzzle.
Absolutely. You know, it's also the lack of friends. You know, obviously, if you both were in the same social circles, or I suppose as well, you know, in the workshops you do, you get the clients to sort of identify these lacks, because I've seen that in your books as well, these sort of dilemmas and lacks that these breakups cause.
Yes, absolutely. And going into what I would call repetitive patterns, and often I'm going to go into just a slightly curve here. Oftentimes, whether you believe in past lives or not, quantum physics says we're multidimensional beings.
Yep, absolutely.
Multidimensional lives. But oftentimes there are repetitive patterns that are associated with these various relationships. And so sometimes what I've seen is a healing occur that whatever contract, whatever issue that is continued to be brought forward in a relationship, when that healing occurs, then the relationship dissolves. But that doesn't mean, and it's a healthy thing for that to happen, but that doesn't mean there isn't any loss associated with it. So any kind of past life issues, often it will make it feel more out of proportion to than
right.
What
so
you're actually
I get you. So yeah, absolutely. So what you're saying, if I mean, on a conscious level, most people wouldn't think this way, but if you take into effect the idea that we've chosen to come here, that there are such things as past life, that perhaps we've reincarnated to meet certain people that we do. So when we do meet them, there was some sort of healing that was going to take place between these two people, even though in the moment it may not feel like that, because you may say, well, we're parting because we've just not been able to work things out. We're just not right for each other. But actually, on a deeper level, everything was perfect.
Yes, absolutely. That might be the very healing that needed to transpire in order for you and the other person to move forward and break free from that energetic pattern. Energetic patterns, and it's very interesting. Bruce Lipton talks about this in his study of epigenetics. I mean, energetic patterns are passed on generational to generational, and I've seen ancestral grief be carried forward. People, I had a woman come in and she couldn't really figure out why she was feeling like she was grieving and sad all the time, and we followed it back to she came from a Jewish community, and this ancestral grief she was still holding from the community, from the Holocaust and all of that. And so we had to let go of, she released and had to let go of the mass trauma that was endured in that in not her generation, but ancestral generations that had passed. And until she was able to do that, she couldn't let go of it. She kept getting into these relationships that caused her grief, and yet she couldn't understand why she was grieving, if that makes sense. It's kind of a repetitive pattern, and it allows us to, okay, now we can let go of, it seems like completely different issues, but grief is grief. So your grief resonates, has a certain vibration to it, as all emotions do. And if something comes up that triggers old grief and you don't know where the heck it's coming from, it's because it's resonating the same. It's just coming up to be resolved. Most people don't realize that. And you can do that with some of the tools that I've got in the book.
Yeah.
At that cellular level, that level of the epigenetics that Bruce Lipton talks about.
And we will get into that as well. But just going back to what you were saying about the past lives, I mean, do you take clients to a past life if that's what they feel would help them to heal?
Yes. I'll use hypnotherapy. Oftentimes, something called soul detective work, which we use a type of hypnotherapy and energy psychology and go into and communicate with the soul. And if that person goes to a past life or another, again, depending on how you believe, another dimensional experience of life, then there's something there that needs to be resolved. Otherwise, they don't go there.
No.
If they come in and they think they have a past life issue, and we go into exploring, and it doesn't come up. One of the tools that I use, which I couldn't share in the book because it requires two people to do, but it's called clinical kinesiology. Often it's referred to muscle testing, and it's a way that I will communicate with the subconscious of the client, and we can really fine tune and allow the body and the subconscious to lead us to wherever that client needs to go to heal. And often it's past life.
Yeah. I mean, it's because obviously your book's tied in, published from the Ozark Mountain Publishing, so I find that fascinating, the time with past life regression, and I think that's a very interesting way of looking at things. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because energy, it doesn't go anywhere.
No, that's right. It does not. It does not. And I mean, I've been through. I mean, as we all have our fair share of relationship breakdowns. And it's always very difficult where the other party's got to leave, and but you just have to say to yourself that this is happening for the best. And it's perhaps if you could look at it from a different perspective, that perhaps your soul contracts have come to an end.
Absolutely, and that's the piece of it that provides the healing. When you get caught up or you get stuck, and I use something called the grief cycle, and I think it's applicable to all types of grief. So there's a shock phase, and most of us, when we have any kind of a loss, we go through a kind of, I can't believe this is happening or happened stage. And then there's a protest phase, and that's just, a lot of times we're trying to figure out the why and how we might have prevented it, or, meaning in the situation. And after we get through the protest phase, there's this disorganization phase. So oftentimes people there are trying to find themselves in okay, who am I apart from if I'm not a wife any longer, or a husband, or whatever role you might have taken in that relationship. Who am I? And so there's that sense of loss of identity within that. And then there's that reorganization phase, which often occurs when people are starting to move forward. They're starting to develop new healthy habits. They're starting to find themselves apart from that which they've lost. And then recovery, I've put in the middle, because as long as you're moving through all those phases of the grief cycle, you are in recovery. Recovery is not static. If you are stuck in one of those phases, then there's something that needs to be released, and that's when these techniques help.
Sure.
Use these techniques, and you might be stuck in that protest. You might be really angry. A lot of people have difficulty forgiving. You might need to use the techniques to help yourself release that.
Well, can I just ask?
Recognize, well, maybe. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry. So go ahead.
Well, until you get through all of that, you can't let that you can't recognize that, this contract was finished, or this is the recovery process.
No, it does make a lot of sense, and what you're saying is, as long as you're out of one of those particular patterns, you know that you're moving on, because some of those patterns can also be, trying to return to my former life, trying to, look at everything that look at all the good points and not seeing the balance of both the good and bad, and anniversaries as well. Looking at the anniversaries when they come up, these are all signs, aren't they, of being stuck within some of those patterns.
Yes. Well, whenever you go back into, now I will say something about anniversaries and any kind of milestone that comes up. Oftentimes what it'll do is it'll put you back into that sense of whatever, if it was the death of a loved one or loss of a relationship or job, whatever, it'll remind you of the intensity of that loss. Now, if it's just I don't want to say momentary, but the intensity of that is usually less when you come up on an anniversary, but it's still there, and then it will dissipate. As long as it's, that awareness comes up and you recognize, this is the day that I lost my loved one, or, this is the day I lost my job, and you process that, usually it doesn't last as long as the original loss, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
So as long as, whenever anniversaries or milestones, or, people will talk about songs that will come up, or something that reminds them of a particular loss, there's going to be that momentary feeling of sadness, perhaps, maybe feeling of anger, whatever emotion is attached there. You process that emotion, and then it dissipates, then you're still in that recovery process. It's when you are stuck and you can't forgive, or you can't let go, or you repeat that memory over and over again, that's when you're stuck. And that's really when these tools are most helpful, because you can do the tapping, you can do the meditations, you can do rituals, you can do several of the energy exercises that I have people do.
Right,
and that will help you break free from that block.
Okay. Well, we're going to get into some of those transformational skills just in a bit, so we're just going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows. Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.
The More Show is in partnership with Ozark Mountain Publishing, taking readers beyond the unexplained.
Welcome back to the show. I'm still joined by my guest, Sherry. Now, Sherry, just before the break there, just before we move into some of the sort of transformational parts of your work to cope with grief and loss, obviously, we grieve as well, don't we, as a sort of collectiveness, as a sort of community when large events happen in the world. I mean, just look at September the 11th, for example.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that really creates what's been termed as a morphic field. And, in some ways, people will come together and support each other in this process. And unfortunately, that can also go the other direction where they support each other in their fear-based inability to move forward, those kinds of things. And it's when a collective consciousness has that experience that you've got to, the best way that I can describe this is if you can step out of that and see and ask, is this mine or is this the collective consciousness or maybe my culture or, even environment that I'm living in? It can be as condensed as a family or it can be as broad as a city, state, country. So the only way sometimes that people can go through their own recovery process is to try to be aware of this collective consciousness of grief and step out of it and work on their own experience of it. And then it's like a ripple in the pond. They become the healing catalyst for the next person and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, you list sort of 3 to 4, well, 4 tasks to accept loss in your book as well. Well, 1 is the accepting the reality of the loss, 2 is working through the pain, and 3 is adjusting to the environment.
Yes. And then that 4th one is relocating the loved one, and what I mean by that is that what we talked about earlier with rather than seeing your loved one as outside of you, you see them as within you, or the memories, you reconnect with the memories and those types of things. So the types of, well, I want to call it, I don't like to use the word stage, but in this case it somewhat is a stage process that you look at you have to look at the fact that the loss has occurred, and those tasks are really in that if you superimpose the grief cycle on this, accepting the reality of loss would be within that protest phase of the grief cycle. So rather than protesting and trying to figure out why and what you could do different, that keeps you stuck there. That accepting piece of it is very important, recognizing and accepting. And then that allows you to move forward. And the working through the pain would be in that disorganization. You're recognizing the pain, so to speak. You're recognizing that you've lost that sense of self. And you're trying to, and this also applies to adjust to the environment, you're trying to create a new healthy role for yourself, and that experience of emotionally relocating the deceased or filing away a safe place the mental or emotional memories of the deceased, that goes into that reorganization. You're recognizing that you can move forward apart from what you've lost. Apart from the loss itself, you can continue to move forward. Still respect, still remember the individual that you lost. So the task of mourning, the 4 tasks of mourning, that is specifically about the loss of a loved one, although it can be superimposed upon that grief cycle.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and we haven't got time to go through all the sort of tools and points that you put across in the book. But I mean, obviously, there are integrative tools to transform and transcend grief and loss, and there's some simple ones as well, aren't there?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we have really lost touch with, although there are rituals oftentimes for, there are funerals and memorials and so forth, we've really lost touch with healing rituals. And sometimes a healing ritual can be as simple as lighting a candle in the memory of a loved one. And one of the rituals that I do in my bereavement group is we light the candle at the beginning of the group in memory of our loved one, and at the end of our group, we gather around in a circle, and we basically, what I say is, we're going to blow their light out and take their light with us. It's a simple ritual, but it has a lot of meaning to each person. So they realize that light is continually lit within them, and it can go wherever they go. And so, lighting a candle, sometimes using something as simple as breath work and taking a deep breath and just imagining everything gathering up, any kind of stress or any kind of dis-ease within your body and releasing it with a breath, that can be a healing ritual. And then, just basically telling your story and doing the tapping techniques that I've listed in the book.
Yeah.
That can be a form of ritual.
I think that's very beautiful, the idea of
I've
lighting.
got several listed in the book.
Yeah.
Excuse me, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a very beautiful thing to, light the candle and then, put the candle out and take that light within you. Would you say those techniques apply to mending a broken heart in a sense? I mean, I suppose it's all the same, isn't it?
And oftentimes what I would tell people to do with the rituals with, for example, the loss of a relationship is utilizing the breath work, for example. So, breathing in that experience of light and love and the continuity of life, and knowing that everything is in divine order, and releasing anything that's contradicting that. And you can use the breathwork technique for that. You could use the burning ceremony. And, for some people, it would be exactly what they need. They may take every letter they've ever received from that loved one and in a way of releasing and letting go, do a burning ceremony. Or a burying ceremony. You can bury or burn it. It's one of the wonderful things about rituals is it's the intent behind it. And Lynn McTaggart does a lot of work on intention. And it's the intention behind any ritual. Ritual has no meaning whatsoever if we just do it in kind of a rote fashion. But if we put an intention behind it, and if the intention is to release all the negative memories that relationship brought you, then that would be part of that healing ritual.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I'll go back to what I said before, which you mentioned in your work as well, the journal, keeping notes on how you feel. highlighting points in the journal. For example, am I trying, get the right words here, but how am I feeling? Do I feel safe again? What do I enjoy by myself? What can I do without this person?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I've got the journaling throughout the book here, is to really get each individual is going to experience it differently, so they really need to get in touch with their own experience of whatever loss it is, whether it's a relationship or the loss of a loved one or a job or any of that, and taking that information. That journaling, can be healing in and of itself. But then when you combine it with some of the other techniques, it just it magnifies the results, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and you put in your book as well about working with the sort of subtle energy bodies, the chakras and the biofield as well.
Yes. And I've got some techniques in there to help work and clean the chakras. So when you're doing if we were able to do that, the Skype thing today, I was going to show one of the techniques. If you do the heart massage with the right hand, and you would go toward the little finger, and you just simply do a heart massage and let go of all that you're carrying in your heart, that in and of itself is a powerful tool. The meditation that I have in there, now I have the script in there, but I do have a CD, the Release and Transform Burden, and it's a meditation to awaken the healing light within. It all goes to the heart, and it takes the energy from the heart and expands it into the other chakras. So you're cleaning all of the chakras with your heart energy once you've got it cleaned up. Our heart energy it's been shown to be the strongest organ in our body. It's even stronger than our brain. And there's been some research that goes back and forth between it's 100 times stronger than our brain, but technically it's just stronger than our brain. And so when we can get it in entrainment and we can clean out all the chakras, including the third eye and the crown chakra, then you're going to be better balanced and more able to move forward through your healing journey.
Yeah. And would you say this, well, you must do, I think, mind exercises as well? I mean, does that play a part in your work?
Yes, absolutely. There's several different types of exercises, but the energy psychology exercises, and there's a variety of different ways of doing it. Donna Eden's 5-minute routine, she does a form of exercises. But what that does is it helps control the left and the right hemisphere of the brain and the frontal and what's called the basal part, the back part of the brain. And it helps unscramble your energies. It helps when we have a full brain and what I would consider a fully conscious mind. So we've got the conscious mind and the subconscious mind on board, then we're better able to go through the recovery process. So those energy techniques help with that. There's a meditation that I've included if you purchase the book. It's called Transforming the Inner Critic, and that goes into the inner critic part of this whole process. Oftentimes we're so hard on ourselves, and if we can transform that inner critic to be our inner guide, which is what this meditation is set to do, then you've got a full brain, your heart's in alignment, you're fully in balance, and you're centered on all aspects of yourself.
Yeah. And it's amazing, isn't it? Because your work explores...
In alignment.
Yeah, the inner light. Yeah, well, your work explores as well how the body's energy system, actually holds all this information in a sense, at a sort of cellular and energetic level. So, you also explore how that to heal that also helps in the recovery. Yes,
because that's what triggers us. That's if we don't release it at a cellular level or an energetic level, then it's still there. Then we're going to be triggered by anything that feels similar. What I was talking about earlier, if there's something there that resonates with a feeling of loss, and anything might come along that that feels similar, it may feel out of proportion because we've accumulated it over and over again, and unless we let go of that at a cellular level, then we're unable to, well, I don't want to say unable, we're less likely to move forward into that recovery process because we're continually activated and triggered by it.
And just again, I mean, what does a recovery process look like once you've gone through that tunnel and you've gone into the light in a sense and you're out the other side?
Well, basically, the way that I define recovery is you're really moving forward apart from what you've lost. That doesn't mean that you, especially if you've lost a loved one, doesn't mean that you forget. It doesn't mean that you, and a lot of people will get upset when people tell them they need to get over it. It doesn't mean that you technically get over, because you're not ever going to not miss that loved one if it's a loss to death. But you can move beyond that incapacitating energy, and you become, I guess what I would say, more fluid in your the way that you approach life.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that means that they recognize that life's important, and they're going to do something instead of just, struggling day to day. They're going to embrace the life they have. So it implies living apart from that loss in a way that you can embrace life again and enjoy it again.
Okay.
It may be a little different with a relationship or a job.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, the loss of a loved one. I mean, at the end of the day, with a relationship, you can still pick the phone up if you wanted to. They're still there. But obviously, with the loss of a loved one, you've only got that sort of psychic sort of, sort of connection in a way to reach out to them. So, what would you say? Obviously, we're at the bottom of the top of the show, shall I say? What would you say is the most important message of your book then?
Basically, that you can triumph over your tragedy, you can transform this pain, and you can recover from the trauma and move forward. So if you're having difficulty moving forward after a significant loss, whatever it is, and you are just kind of feeling stuck, there are tools that can help you move forward and find joy again.
Fantastic. Well, look, Sherry, thank you so much for joining us. Now, where can people also get your book as well? Is there a link to your book on the website?
There is a link on my website. Also, ozarkmountain.com has it listed. I believe you would have to go to my author site there. I believe Amazon is... I think it's up at Amazon. My understanding was that it was going to be available in August, so I believe it's available on Amazon.com now as well. But you can go to my website, you can go to Ozark Mountain website, or you can go to the Amazon website. I believe that's how you can find it.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to put links on the website as well, and there's a link on the screen now for the book as well. So, Sherry O'Brien, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. You're welcome, and thank you, Kevin.
Well, we've come to an end on today's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines. Available for download on all major digital platforms.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows. Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.
The More Show is in partnership with Ozark Mountain Publishing, taking readers beyond the unexplained.